Hey everyone, welcome to the Stay Informed podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Gonzalez, and my co host today, Tom, is sitting this one out because I am joined by a very special guest, Steve Weger, General Manager of Auto here at Informed. On today's episode, we're discussing trends in auto finance. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Well, thank you, Jessica, so much for inviting me.
You're so welcome. Can you give me a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've been in the auto business for about 22 years. So I started in 2001 with Capital One. I've spent almost all of my time with Capital One, holding a variety of different jobs. So I started off in our credit program, building our credit framework. So which customers to be approved, which customers to be declined. I did that for our subprime programs, all the way up through our prime programs, and spent about 10 years doing that before moving over and running one of our four sales divisions for the entire country. After doing that for a couple of years, which was an absolutely amazing job, really getting an opportunity to understand the industry in depth and understand our dealers, I moved into running strategy for our origination side. And then for the past 6 years, I actually ran the origination side for Capital One. So this meant all of the sales teams, all of the funding departments, our dealer risk, our dealer accounting teams, and it was the operations teams, in addition to the analytics that drove that, and the product teams that built all the products to support those programs. And then I left Capital One in February of this year, and I joined Informed in May. It has been an absolutely amazing journey. Though only 2 months, I have learned a ton from Informed in terms about how technology can be used to further insulate the ups and downs of the auto business.
Thank you, Steve. And wow, what a really great, impressive background. I know that here at Informed, we're super excited for you to join the team and really give us some of the insights that you've experienced from Cap One, which is, a leading digital as well as, financing organization. So thanks so much for joining us here at Informed, as also on the podcast. So to kick off the show, can you give us a little background on how you see the trends in vehicle affordability? You touched on it a little briefly about how that's a big selling point for Informed, but what do you think the influences are outside in auto lending in general?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So when you think about vehicle affordability, it's going to boil down to the three things. One is, well, what's the absolute price of the car? The second is, what is the price of financing that car? And then the third, are there ancillary things adjacent to lending that make vehicle ownership more expensive? And so the first thing, getting into the prices of the cars. Well, since COVID and the supply shortage that happened resulting from that, that has driven prices up tremendously. And so prices now for new cars are over $40,000. While that's about 2,000 down from the peak, which was in 2022, there's still, right now we're at steady production. It feels like we're going to stay at that elevated rate. I mean, I remember joining the company, the prices were in the 20,000s. Used car pricings have also increased dramatically due to supply shortages. And while you think about like, okay, what's going to drive more the used car prices to come down? What would have to be necessary for that to come down? That's going to be increased supply. But two things are mitigating that from happening. One is a couple of years ago, leasing really pulled back. So you don't have a lot of used cars coming off market from leases. And the second is customers trading their used cars in to buy new cars. But because of the high car prices before, a lot of customers are underwater and they have too much negative equity to actually buy new cars. So I don't expect used car prices to decrease at all in the near future. They may come down slightly, but they're really going to stay at extremely elevated levels, at least through 2025, I think. Then if you look at rates, well, rates have gone up absolutely tremendously. They're about 6.7%, almost 7% for new, and close to 12% for used. Very, very high. The thing that you're going to have to see for rates to come down is either the Fed is going to cut a bunch of their rates, or you're going to have risk dramatically decrease. The Fed may cut rates slightly in 2024 going into 2025, but I would expect them to remain pretty high because the economy is still relatively moving strong. Unemployment is still very healthy, and the job market is still adding jobs at a very brisk rate. Now, when you have high rates and high prices, that's going to drive the high monthly payments. The high monthly payments today for a new car, let's say, is around $735. Just in 2020, that was about $570. So that's a huge increase in a very short period of time. And again, I don't think there's a lot that's going to happen on the side to bring that down. And then finally, you look at what are some of the ancillary costs of owning a vehicle. And the major thing that pops up is insurance. Insurance rates have increased about $30 in the past year per month, and that is extremely high. And because that has gone up so much, another thing that's happening is customers are more likely to drive without insurance. That's about 14% estimated today, up from just 11% a couple of years ago.
So thank you for that. It's really interesting. I think I saw something yesterday coming out though that there is segments that used car prices are decreasing, but with the high interest rates that they're still staying relatively monthly payments as the same. So from that perspective, I think like if you're not in the know of all of the audit industry, um, if you're not living it, breathing it, if you're not Cap One, Chase, all the big ones of the world, you kind of
Yeah.
are just what is the process, right? So I guess from that perspective, how should this affect consumers, right? I think we all know that cars are expensive, they're continuously expensive. We both live in Texas, and it'll be a marker that you need a vehicle no matter what. So with interest rates that high, people can't have the luxury of like waiting around for interest rates to go less. But how can consumers really take all of these great facts and use them on their day-to-day purchases?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So if you're looking for a deal as a customer, there's probably one segment of the market that is actually getting to be more and more affordable, and that's used EVs. And so that is a market where if you have the ability to charge effectively, either you can add something to your home, or you can charge at work, or you've got an apartment complex that has charging. I think that's an area where you can find vehicles that are pretty affordable right now, and it's important to go look in that place. It's also important not just to look at the price of the car, to make sure you're paying attention to total affordability or total cost of ownership. And so that means looking at the cost of insurance for that car. It means looking at the cost of gas for that car and the cost of repairs. So you can get a used Tesla, for instance, pretty cost effectively. But then if that car happens to be in an accident or happens to need maintenance, well, then that cost of repair is extremely high. So I think you just have to make sure you're doing your research all around as a consumer to find the right things.
Yeah, I think that's great tips. And then even if you're gonna, I keep my cars forever. I know some people like to get a new car, get into leasing every other year or something nuts like that to me. I don't want to do the car process that frequently, but I know that in the industry, there's some execs at GMF that I know that they switch out cars, every 3 months, every 6 months. So good to also think about the life cycle of your own ownership, and if you know yourself best when you're making those decisions. So I think that's really great advice. So I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that push on cars lasting longer. I think that is a very true statement. So the quality has definitely gone up.
Yeah. And I think to that aspect, right, like the way that you purchase vehicles, it kind of comes down to, do you think in general people are purchasing vehicles differently? I know like we always have the hesitation. I still am not going to be a fan of going into a dealership, but ultimately, I haven't seen, I think we talked about like 3 or 4 years ago, it was always like, hey, especially with COVID happening, we are going to be able to, go online, purchase something, digital retailing solution, and then go from the beginning to the end process and just, it's going to, a new car is going to show up. And I see, some of the market has kind of gone there, but ultimately, like for a day-to-day consumer, you're going to have to go into a car dealership. But we do see some changes. In your perspective, what are some differences and things to highlight there?
Yeah, I love that push. I think if you had asked me in 2018 if I would buy a car completely online in 2024, I would say, of course, that's exactly how it's happening. Like the indicators were so strong. I thought everybody would be buying a car completely online in 2024. Like maybe you would just do your test drive in dealerships. But the industry hasn't quite evolved, end to end as fast as I think people thought, 5, 6 years ago. Everybody starts their process online. Like no one goes into a dealership and says, "Hey, I would like to learn about your car." Like that process has already happened. So customers are going online. They're doing all of their research online, including getting an idea for what pricing should look like and what financing should look like. Now, the thing that is great is like consumers say, okay, this is wonderful. This feels a lot like how I shop for everything else. Like if I want to buy, a new backpack for my kids going back to school, I just surf on Amazon. It takes like 5 minutes. Then it's delivered to my house the next day. It's super seamless. You can't quite do that with the cars, like holistically all the time right now. So to your point, most customers have to go into a dealership still and complete that process. And some of them are finding the process not to be as fast as they want once they get to the dealership. I've had experiences where I have 100% negotiated. I am going to pay this much for the car. I don't have a trade-in. I'm not taking out financing, and I still sit in that dealership for an hour and a half. The
Same.
contracting process, the verification process are extremely, extremely slow. And if you're a subprime or near prime customer and you have to do some of those proof of those stipulations, that verification can take even longer for that aspect. And it really comes down to how fast can a dealership move through the contracting process and the verification process. And I think that's where Informed jumps in really well and helps out. And so we've got the auto fund process, which can, on almost real time, classify documents, extract data, and do many of the verifications that lenders want. So we have the ability for lenders and customers to submit stipulations online very quickly. And all of that means that the dealer can then speed up the process and have a better customer experience.
I agree. I think it's funny because, there was just so much buzz about how we were all going to just purchase from beginning to end and, how live and breathe online. And still, even after COVID, they were like, everything's going to go back offline. But, everybody's still back in the dealerships. I feel like that, most people are still there. And it's funny because when we were doing all these reasonings and talking about strategy, I'm the type that I'm a numbers girl and I really wanted like the ROI, how much it's going to return. I want the features. Like I'm like just putting it in black and white listing out. And so I have no like care even for the test drive, which I know somebody are going to slap me in the hand later on, but I don't even want to test drive it. I'm like, I just want the specs. I want to know the warranty. I want to know all the stuff and then, purchase my vehicle. So I would be like the ideal person to like start and end all of that online. And I try to do most of it online, like you said, but I still will spend, a couple of hours in the dealership, even in those like very like basic scenarios. So it's so funny. But I think, the same trends that we saw with digital contracting, right? I remember, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we got all the charts that said digital contracting is just going to take the waves and we'll see no
Yeah.
paper contracts, right? And we're still, barely getting to those waves, but we still see, a lot of lenders that are fully paper and some lenders that are 70%, e-contracting, but I still don't see it like 100% e-contract or even high 90s for most lenders. So it's interesting to hear. And I think even with like last week or the 2 weeks ago with the CDK ransomware and everyone going old school, going back to paper, I bet if we go to a conference the next week or so, we're going to hear a lot of dealers telling us like, I told you so.
Yeah,
You
yeah, I
shouldn't go to
agree.
digital, right? And thank goodness we had like an old paper copy back there because, them using whiteout and all the services, really pushes back. So to that point, are you thinking about other car trends that may be positive, but also the negative experience? What are you kind of looking at when some of those aspects are coming up?
Yeah, I think about the affordability, first you brought that up. And I really worry for what that does for customers who need to have a car and don't have quite all the finances to put something together. I mean, when car prices are very expensive and the financing is very expensive, many of those consumers, have to still buy a car. And the way they're sort of making the monthly payments work for them is they're extending out their monthly payments by, going from instead of 72 maybe to 84 months. And that makes it harder for them to pay off the car. Now, unfortunately, we're also seeing some of these customers, if they're going to try to find a way to make this work, is they are relying on misrepresentation or fraud to get financed, and lenders have to be incredibly careful about that. And that the percentage of fraud going up is just tremendous in the industry, and this means both. I'm applying, but this isn't really Steve who's applying for a car, but it could also be me applying but using a fake pay stub or a fake bank statement to inflate my income or to create income when there is no income, just to make sure that I'm eligible to get the car that I want. And so I think lenders, again, have to be extremely careful about that. And when lenders think about protecting themselves from fraud or misrepresentation, it's not about like, hey, I just need a defense. It is about creating a series of products and methods of catching all these different kinds of misrep or fraud. And so they may have some homegrown products they have, plus two or three other vendors they're bringing in. And there are a bunch of providers in this space that are helping with data fraud, where like, hey, let me look at the credit history of this particular person that's coming in, or their residential history, and I can tell you if that makes sense or not. But there aren't that many players who can help on the document side, which is again, are these pay stubs or income documents valid or not valid? And Inform plays a key role in that space where we're building that capability in a way that is just light years ahead of what our competitors can do. So I'm really excited about the future of that product coming into the market.
Yeah, definitely. So I think from the perspective of, fraud, it's always going to be a hot topic, and no matter how the market is looking, and also regulatory. So you touched on some of the fraud aspects, but can you give us some insights on some trends that you're thinking about, or something that when you were at Cap One that was really, pain in your neck that you really wanted to focus on? Any insights there?
Yeah, so there were a couple things that were a huge pains in the neck. So if you think about dealerships that are trying to go, they're online to offline, and how do they create a seamless process for that. We would have dealerships in that space send us incomplete documents, or they would try to rush through the financing process. And every time that we would have to hold them up for something, they would get extremely frustrated, and they would try to find a way to go with a lender who maybe had fewer hurdles in there. And that sounds completely fine. It's like, hey, Capital One, or hey, whatever lender, if you have too many hurdles in front of the dealer, it's perfectly fine for that dealer to go somewhere else. Except in some of those situations, they're going to another lender with a higher price, or a worse deal for the consumer. And so instead of just saying, hey, look, let me just accept more risk and give the customer a higher APR, is there a system that we could have in place where we can work with dealers as fast as they want to go, but still make sure the lending is safe, and therefore the rates and the deal structure for the customers are best. And so everyone is in the safest situation. And we would always try to construct a Capital One, like, how do we fund faster? How do we clear STIPs faster? What are things that we can do? And often that meant putting more money at it. Like, let me spend more money on my own technology. Let me have more funders that are available to handle things, documents as they come in quicker. Let me pay more overtime so I'm there late at night or on weekends. And we are always hungry to try to find a systematic way to make that happen. So I think it's awesome, again, that Informed has those capabilities to make the funding process so much faster, so that the dealers are less willing to put customers in worse situations because there's fewer hurdles there, and that customers can get to better outcomes, lenders can benefit, and underwrite as effectively as they want.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. I think, there's a lot of different people that listen to the podcast, but from the perspective, I know my background is in Santander consumer, which is, super subprime, and there's kind of going to full market spectrum, but a lot of differentiation of kind of when you're thinking about getting those things done and how that effectiveness around dealerships. And then we have some lenders that are also all about the relationships. They want dealers to pick up the phone. So it's interesting to hear kind of the perspective from Cap One, but really, really appreciate your insights today, Steve. It was really great talking to you. So I'm looking forward to all the great things that you come and bring to Informed with all your background and knowledge. So thanks for your time. That's all we have for today. Until next time, stay informed.
Thank you.